Hello, my name is Dr. Danielle Stewart, and I'm the ESL and Migrant Supervisor at Russellville School District. My email is danielle.stewart@rsdk12.net. Welcome to the ARC TESOL Conference for 2021. I'm going to talk to you today about unaccompanied minor ESL students, why they came to the United States, why they're in Arkansas, and also a look into their struggles and how we can best serve them. Before we begin, I want to know what you know about unaccompanied minors. So please take a following couple minutes and answer the following questions. Number 1, what does unaccompanied minor mean? Number 2, where are they coming from? Number 3, what ages are the children? And number 4, what happens once these students arrive? I'm going to give you about a minute to reflect and answer these questions before we begin. Okay, so what are unaccompanied minors? We're going to take some time as we go through this presentation and answer some of those questions that you had, because Arkansas has a very unique population of unaccompanied minors. But before we begin, I want to talk about just what does that mean when we have unaccompanied minors in our school system. So the definition is, in immigration law, an unaccompanied minor, also known as separated children, are generally defined as foreign nationals or stateless persons below the age of 18 who arrive on the territory of the state unaccompanied by a responsible adult, and for as long as they are not effectively taken into care of such a person. So these unaccompanied minors are kids that are coming from other countries. Typically for Arkansas, they're close to Central America, Mexico, Latin America countries, and they're coming to Arkansas unaccompanied, which means alone, without a parent or without a responsible adult. Now for this, it says that they're below the age of 18, but as you'll see throughout our presentation, that sometimes those ages can be much lower than 18 or sometimes a little older than 18, depending on when they arrive. So I'm sure you're wondering where they're coming from. We mentioned that, a lot of Arkansas is from, the unaccompanied minors are from Central America, but let's get more specific about where they're actually coming from. So if you notice, a lot of people believe that unaccompanied minors or the immigrant students that we're receiving in Arkansas, because Mexico is our closest border, a lot of people just automatically assume that our unaccompanied children are coming from Mexico. But that's not necessarily the case. If you see on this chart that was put out about 2012 to 2015, you can see that only 5% of our unaccompanied immigrant children came from Mexico, where Guatemala was 37%, El Salvador 28%, and Honduras 27%. Specifically in our area in Russellville, we see more of an unaccompanied immigrant child population from El Salvador. If you look at the size of El Salvador, I think that's something that's so crazy, is that El Salvador is half the area physically of Arkansas. However, we have a lot of students from there because their population is much heavier than Arkansas. Something also to take into account is the fact that Central America has been recovering from different political issues, asylum cases. Also, El Salvador had a civil war. And so, therefore, there's a lot of political unrest in those countries. And so, I think it's interesting to see the difference in percentage numbers based upon the fact that even though Mexico is much larger and our closest neighbor, we don't see as many unaccompanied children from those countries. Okay, so if you look at this information from 2013, and I'm almost positive this would mimic how it looks now, you can also see that the kids that are coming to the United States alone, it's still very much so those three Central American countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. Mexico and Ecuador have a little bit of a percentage, but most of the time the kids that are coming from Mexico do so by either a passport or a student visa, or they come with their parents and their parents are on working visas, but they're definitely coming with adults more often, like a parent or an aunt or a grandparent. And the ones that are coming from Central America are literally arriving here alone by themselves. A lot of them, as you can see the percentages. So how many children is that? Like, how do those percentages look? If you look at this chart, and this one's from 2008 to 2017, because 2017 was one of the more instrumental years of like the higher influxes from like 2014 to 2017. We definitely saw a greater demographic of those unaccompanied minors. So if you look at that to see how many that is, so you notice in 2014 was one of the biggest years where we saw almost 70,000 unaccompanied minors in the United States. You see those country colors, big populations from Central America still, where all of the kids that came from Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala equal 3 times as many that came from Mexico that year for 2014. And you notice that in 2017 it declined again. Every time there's a political shift, you'll see a change in how many unaccompanied minors we get in the United States, and specifically state by state. It depends on if it's a border state versus Arkansas not being one. So this is kind of what I was saying. Here's some more data just to give you some background on 2014 was such a huge year. I know it seems like not that long ago, but every year we get more unaccompanied minors. So you can see the average before 2012 was 8,000. And then that one year in 2014, it became almost 60, 70,000 worth of unaccompanied minors. And remember, these are kids traveling to the United States all the way through Mexico and Central America without a parent. So depending upon the political atmosphere, what happens to them once they get to the border is very different depending on the political climate. So some immigration policies release the students into the United States immediately to relatives, friends, anyone who that will claim the student at the border. However, with current policies, there are a lot of detention centers where these unaccompanied minors are held. Sometimes they're deported back, but sometimes they don't have a parent to help them get sent back to their home country. So they're held at these detention centers for quite a while before a decision is made. So here's again just some more evidence to kind of see how and where these kids are coming from and coming to. So you see that at the bottom, if you look at the map part, you can see that the Rio Grande is the #1 biggest place for students from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras to cross. You do have Laredo and Tucson, Arizona, Del Rio, some of those other places, but overwhelmingly our kids are crossing through that southern Texas border. So what ages are the children? Because, it's said in the definition that they're going to be around 18 or a little bit below, but what we're seeing is that a large majority of the students are between 12 and 19 years old. And if you look at this data, it's a little dated from 2015. However, we're seeing the same trends now, that the majority of them are between 15 and 17 years old. However, in our specific school district, we see unaccompanied minors that come even when they're 19, 20, because if they're under 21, we can still serve them. So just imagine, kind of put yourself in their position for a minute, that you're traveling maybe across 3 different countries all the way to the United States alone without a way for an adult to help you when you arrive. So really the buildings that are seeing the biggest influx of these unaccompanied minors really are the middle schools, the junior highs, and then mostly the high schools. Because of that age demographic, we're not seeing a lot of elementary students coming alone, because obviously they can't really make the trip and travel by themselves across the border. So before we ask what happens when they arrive, you might be wondering, how do they get here? So this is one, and I'm not going to stereotype the entire group because that is not true, but this is one common possibility for them arriving here, especially for the young males that are coming from Central America. There are cargo trains that are cargo. They're not passenger. However, they do ride these sometimes through Mexico, through the large parts of Mexico, to be able to get to the different country borders. However, please note that sometimes our unaccompanied minors arrive by train or by car or by bus. Sometimes they take different buses, or they carpool with people who are also unaccompanied minors. And sometimes, and I have heard this multiple times, sometimes they actually walk and hitchhike through the different countries to arrive at our border. So this is kind of the routes that they travel. Central Americans can take, sometimes they can take months of walking and going through these places, but typically this is what the data says is the most common route for travel from Central America to the United States. So you can see the different routes or routes, however you say that, but you can see how they come from Central America through Mexico. Typically they follow this path. There are kind of 4 different branches that they branch off once they get to like mid-Mexico. You can go the Reynosa or Nuevo Laredo route. You can see that pink line kind of divides there. And it actually goes through 2 cities, Monterrey and Saltillo, which those 2 cities are cities I'm very, very familiar with and I've actually spent a lot of time in. And they are very much transportation hubs. You can also see that there's a green line that goes from central Mexico into Ciudad Juarez, which is getting closer to the Arizona and New Mexico border. And then you also have the brown line, which goes all the way up the west coast of Mexico into basically the Tijuana, California area. So it depends on where the unaccompanied minors are coming. Most of the ones that are coming to Arkansas go through Nuevo Laredo, which is that Texas border that leads up into the state of Texas. So what happens when they arrive? So like I said previously, before sometimes they were released, but right now they actually have holding facilities for our unaccompanied minors. So they're kept there. They're shelters. It's the Department of Health and Human Services which have these holding facilities, and it's actually a piece of the Department of Homeland Security. I put this one last week, opened a new 700-bed shelter, but I actually made this presentation last year. We actually have several more holding facilities now, and I'm sure if you follow the news at all, you know that they're very much overran right now, and they're trying to find a solution to either find responsible adults within the United States to mentor and take on these students, or a place for them to go. While they're in these holding facilities, they are given school and education. However, the equity of that school and education is kind of in question. So when we get these students from these holding facilities in Texas into Arkansas, they usually come with a Department of Homeland Security paperwork. And so you can usually tell like if they've been in a holding facility and what kind of education they've received when they were there. Here's an example of a holding facility. I put this picture in not to make you sad, but I do need you to understand that this is the reality of some of our students that we're educating. And this picture was definitely, it was validated by some of my students that this is exactly how it looks when they're in the holding facilities. So we get these new students and it's time for us to educate them. So what things should we keep in mind as we educate them? So registration, I wanted to point out that undocumented children can attend school. You do not need documentation and paperwork to attend school. The children of undocumented adults have the same right to attend schools as U.S. citizens. So therefore, please keep that in mind when you are registering students. There's actually U.S. Supreme Court cases that prevent you from what they call chilling registration. It means that you have to allow them to come into your school and receive an equitable education. Here is a little bit of background just in case you've ever had this issue. It is not allowed to bar students to school if they do not have a birth certificate. So a lot of schools, when you register, you see on the sign, you must have the following: proof of residence, immunization records, social security card, and also a birth certificate. While you are allowed as a school district to ask for those, you cannot require them to be able to enroll. So if, you've heard people say, oh, I'm sorry, you have to have a social security number to attend school, or I'm sorry, we need your birth certificate, you'll have to come back when you have that. That's actually illegal, and schools are not allowed to require those. For immunizations, it's a little bit different because even though they may come without them, a lot of schools do accept documentation that they've registered to get their immunizations. So that's another thing. But you can't tell them to go home just because they don't have their immunizations. Okay, so different ESL services while they're here. Definitely you're going to have to do this, a home language survey, which we know will be in another language. If they're from Central America, it'll be Spanish. You're not allowed to ask their residency status. So sometimes you'll know a lot from their folder. When you get their records, like I said, sometimes unaccompanied minors will come with documentation from the border that says they've been in a holding facility. But also, sometimes they come with nothing, and that's just part of it. You're just going to have to build it from the ground up, and that's just kind of how we do it. You're going to assess their language ability. Arkansas requires you give them the ELPA 21 screener, which most of you probably already know about. But this will be a good indication of exactly where their language is for English, but also something that's very important, if you can, to give them a test in their native language to see how their math, social studies, science, literacy, those type of things are in their native language, because a lot of times our unaccompanied minors come with large gaps in their education. So above all, for our unaccompanied minors, while education and English services are super important, to me, the social services that we can provide them are more crucial because they are alone. So you want to do things like make sure your unaccompanied minors are provided with food backpacks. You need to hook them up with some mental health. We have a mental health liaison here, so things like that. For a lot of them will come with PTSD. You need to get them with school counseling. You need to hook them up with maybe a Hispanic liaison in your district, or somebody who could serve as a mentor or a buddy. They desperately need an instant mentor. So when these newcomers arrive and they don't have parents, they need to instantly be connected with an adult that's responsible so that they can help them make decisions about housing and food and education, and just they're stressed, they're emotional, and they need someone immediately. So I highly suggest we have a buddy system for each one of our newcomers, so that way they have someone that they know if there's an emergency or something like that that they can contact, and we can get them resources. Of course, you need the cultural and the English immersion programs. These are really important, especially culturally, because they're going through a lot of shock, but also they have a lot of probably unresolved trauma from their journey. And really, it takes some time just to get to know them and know what their needs are. You might also consider asking your ESL administrator at the district, or also maybe your migrant coordinator would have some resources to share. So I want to end this by just giving you like an overall awareness of your unaccompanied minors, and I have provided a link in this PowerPoint If you do not get the link to the PowerPoint to watch this video, it's called 19 Hours, and it's like the life of an unaccompanied minor. If you will just go to YouTube and literally type in 19 Hours Unaccompanied Minor, it will come up. And even though this student's story is in California, it's extremely similar to the stories of our students. The only difference is they don't have public transportation like we do. Our kids usually find rides with other kids. So I appreciate it. Again, my name is Dr. Danielle Stewart. My information was at the beginning of this PowerPoint. I look forward to any feedback or any questions that you have. This was just to kind of bring awareness of where your kiddos that are unaccompanied are coming from. Thank you.